A 65-year-old Air Force veteran shoots and kills two people who broke into his home to burgle and rob it on Thanksgiving Day 2012. While it sounds cut and dry, the details would divide the town of Twin Falls, Minnesota, and then the world once the details became known. What constitutes self-defense? How far can or should one go to protect their castle? What about overkill? And should the age of the victims be a consideration? The concept of an eye for an eye, along with the castle doctrine and stand your ground laws, collide with surprisingly complexity in this case that seems so simplistic on the surface. Byron David Smith worked in the Security Engineering Office of the U.S. State Department before retiring and is a veteran of the Air Force, where he had been stationed around the world in cities like Moscow, Bangkok, and Beijing. He was 65 years old in 2012 when these events took place. Smith lived alone in the home his father had built by hand and in which he was raised. At first caring for an aging mother after his father died, then alone after she passed away. He never married and never had children. He was a bit of a loner and an odd duck. He had several close friends, some of whom lived nearby, but for the most part, Byron was a loner and a bit of a homebody. He enjoyed his own company, and the solitude never bothered him. With no dependents, he was used to doing whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Smith had experienced a rash of burglaries to his home in the preceding months, at least half a dozen and possibly as many as a dozen. When police investigated later, they discovered things missing from robberies that Smith was unaware of, so the number could be higher than he even was aware of. Among the items stolen were thousands of dollars in cash, his deceased father's watch, military medals Smith had earned during the Vietnam War, several mementos his father cherished from his time in a POW camp during World War II, clothing he saved from his years in the military, several firearms, and a lot of jewelry. Smith reported the repeated break-ins to his residence to the police only once, after a large amount of items and cash had been taken, but Smith got the impression that the police didn't take any action to solve or prevent the crimes from reoccurring in the future. He was greatly frustrated and felt that he was on his own to solve this problem. His neighbors reported that their homes were also burglarized during this period, but whether it was the work of one or more people or groups of people was unknown. During his later interview with police, Smith said he was told by a neighbor that the neighbor had seen a local teen, Haile Kifer, wearing some of the military clothing that had been stolen from his home, namely his camouflage flak jacket, a rare item not available to purchase in military surplus stores. Because of this, he strongly suspected Kifer of being responsible for numerous burglaries to his home. It was later learned that Kifer did not possess the military jacket stolen from Smith, and either the neighbor had mistakenly identified the teen wearing it as Kifer or was wrong about the style of jacket she had been wearing. Because of the many break-ins he experienced, Smith was keeping a firearm close to his hand anytime he was at home. He had become fearful of what would happen if the robbers came by while he was at home. Remember, they had stolen his guns, and he was afraid that they could use them against him. He also installed surveillance equipment, including 4 mounted cameras to watch the outside of his home and recording devices within the home to help him keep watch over his property.
On a day in late November, Haile Kifer, 18, and her cousin Nicholas Brady, 17, broke into Smith's home. They broke out a window on the first floor and forced their way inside. Brady spent some time exploring the rooms on the home's first level before he headed toward the basement. When Brady entered the basement, where Byron Smith was reading, Smith grabbed a nearby firearm and shot him. He would then shoot Kifer when she entered, looking for Brady. Kifer and Brady were believed to have committed at least one previous burglary from Smith's home and were being investigated by police for that, along with committing other break-ins in the neighborhood. The trial that ensued would divide the town of Twin Falls, and eventually the world, when the details became known. The devil truly is in the details. A look at Byron Smith's Facebook page comments revealed just how deep this division goes, as people cannot even seem to come to any sort of agreement about right versus wrong, or legal versus illegal in this case. It was the Thanksgiving holiday in America on November 22nd of 2012. Byron Smith spent the day alone, doing some light cleaning and reading. He moved his truck out of the garage and parked it on the street, either because he had plans to tidy up the garage at some point that day, or because he feared it would become burglarized, as both reasons have been cited. He became engrossed in a good book and was in his favorite reading chair in the basement, and hadn't yet gotten around to that chore yet. It was late November and the weather was turning cold, so it was easy to put off the chore while he sat reading by the fire. At 11:30, Smith briefly went to visit a neighbor. While there, he saw Kifer, whom he suspected was responsible for his prior burglaries, drive past his home a few times. He told his neighbor that he needed to, quote, get ready for her, and he returned to his home. Once home, he turned on a recording device he owned and began to monitor his surveillance cameras on the outside of the home. Byron looked periodically over at the monitor that showed the outside of his property. In the late afternoon, he checked the monitor and saw 2 people casing his home, trying the doors and windows, looking for a way inside. Then he went into the basement either because this was a strategic defensible position or to lie in wait to ambush the intruders, depending on which position you want to believe. Byron turned on a handheld recording device and sat it on a bookshelf and grabbed his Ruger Mini 14 and the .22 handgun that was nearby and became still, waiting. Because of the holiday and because there were no vehicles at his home, the 2 intruders likely mistakenly believed the home was unoccupied. As he watched the monitor, he heard sounds of glass breaking, and his surveillance equipment recorded the events that happened next. On the tape, you can hear glass breaking, then an individual walking around on the first floor of Smith's home. It was Nicholas Brady.
As one intruder walked down the stairs to the basement where Smith waited, Smith used his Ruger to fire 3 shots, hitting Nicholas Brady 3 times in the chest. Brady fell down the stairs to the basement floor, and once he had fallen to the bottom of the basement stairs, Smith said, "You're dead," and he shot him again through his outstretched right hand. Smith wrapped up Brady's body in a tarp and pulled him out of sight of the stairs. He then sat back down and replaced the rounds of ammunition in the Ruger he fired. After at least 10 minutes, the second intruder entered the basement, presumably looking for Brady. As Haile Kifer walked down the basement stairs, Smith shoots her several times. Kifer screams and tumbles down the stairs. Smith's Ruger jams and he says, "Oh, sorry about that," as he grabs his .22 handgun. He returns to where Kifer lies and she says, "Oh my God," twice, sounding frightened and panicked. Byron Smith can next be heard saying, "You die," and he fires another shot into her. As he is dragging her body over to where her cousin Nick Brady was placed, Smith hears Kifer gasp and realizes that she is still alive, as he fires 2 more shots under her chin into her head, which he later described as good, clean, finishing shots. Byron Smith can then be heard on his digital recorder speaking in a whisper, saying, quote, "Cute. I'm sure she thought she was a real pro. I feel a little bit safer. Not totally safe. I'm still shaking a bit, but a little bit safer. I refuse to live in fear. I am not a bleeding heart liberal. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess. Not a mess like spilled food, not like vomit, not even like diarrhea. It's the worst mess possible, and I was stuck with it. It was a major complication in my life. You really don't want to know. I was doing my civic duty. Because the law enforcement system wouldn't do it, I had to handle it. I had to do something. The law system, unintelligible, and it fell in my lap. She dropped her problem in my lap. She threw her problems in my face. I have to clean it up. Social misfits, social problems. This bitch was going to go through her life causing problems for other people. They weren't human. I don't think of them as human. I see them as vermin. This bitch was going to go through her life spoiling things for other people. Robbing, drug use. It's like begging him to have him shoot me. Like begging him to shoot me. It's all fun, cool, exciting, highly profitable until somebody kills you. I don't give a damn who she is. I don't care who she is. I'm not sorry. So much regret. I try to be a good person. I try to do what I should, be friendly to other people, help them when I can, try to be a good citizen, not cheat people, be fair. And because I try to be a decent person, people think I'm a patsy. I'm a sucker. People think I'm there for them to take advantage of. Is that the reward for being a good person? And then they dump this mess on me? It's not a mess like spilled food or vomit or even diarrhea. It's far worse. Then they take slice after slice of me. It's a sucker shot. People going down the basement stairs normally watch the steps. $5,000. A $5,000 slice here and a $10,000 slice there. And if I gather enough evidence, they might be prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, it might go to court. If it goes to court, they might be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they might spend 6 months to a year in jail. And when they get out, they need more money than ever, and they're filled with revenge. I refuse to live a life like that. I cannot have that chewing on me for the rest of my life. I cannot. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life. End quote.
Cute. I'm sure she thought she was a real pro. I feel a little bit safer. Not totally safe. I'm still shaking a bit, but a little bit safer. I refuse to live in fear. I am not a bleeding heart liberal. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess. Not like spilled food. Not like vomit. Not even like it. Not even like diarrhea. The worst mess possible. In some tiny little respect. I was doing my civic duty. Because the law enforcement system couldn't handle it, and I had to do it. I had to do it. They weren't human. I don't see them as human. I see them as vermin. This bitch was going to go through her life spoiling things for other people. Thieving, robbing, drug use. It's all fun, cool, exciting, and highly profitable until somebody kills you. Like I'd give a damn who she is. I'm sorry. So much regret. I try to be a good person. I try to do what I should, be friendly to other people, help them when I can. Try to be a good citizen, not cheat people, be fair. And because I try to be a decent person, they think I'm a patsy, I'm a sucker. They think I'm there for them to take advantage of. Is that the reward for being a good person? And if I gather enough evidence, they might be prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, it might go to court. If it goes to court, they might be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they might spend 6 months, 2 years in jail. And then they're out, and they need money worse than ever, and they're filled with revenge. I cannot live a life like that. I cannot have that chewing on me for the rest of my life. I cannot. I refuse to live with that level of fear.
On the recording, Smith, who continued to speak in a whisper for some reason, seemed to direct most of his hostility towards Haile Kifer, who lived with her parents nearby, close to Smith's home. Nick Brady was visiting for Thanksgiving. He is heard on the recording saying, quote, "Mother and father are semi-psychotic. Both are semi-psychotic. I put even odds that one or the other will come here with a gun," end quote. In one section of the audio recording, Smith seems to be rehearsing another conversation with law enforcement. It seems to be related to Kifer's parents and the issues they've had recently. Smith says, quote, "I've gotten a death threat. I've recorded it. Here's a copy of it. I've got a death threat. I'll be giving you a copy of it. I've given you a copy of a death threat. and I expect you to do something about it, unquote. The deaths of Haile Kifer and Nicholas Brady were not immediately reported to police. Smith waited until the next day to contact law enforcement to let them know he shot Kifer and Brady, later stating that he didn't want to bother police on Thanksgiving Day. The next day, Smith called his neighbor, Bill, for advice, saying he solved the break-ins in the neighborhood. He also asked for the recommendation for a criminal defense attorney. This gave the neighbor a bad feeling, and the neighbor is the one who initially contacted the police with his suspicions. In Smith's interview with police, he said that, quote, "Call me a sexist, but when somebody steals clothing and ignores the tools, I tend to think it's a woman." He then said that his neighbor Bill reported to Smith that a local girl was seen wearing his military clothing around town. Smith also told police that he believed his neighbor, a girl named Ashley Williams, was responsible for at least one of the burglaries, saying, quote, "She was not apparently in full possession of her faculties because she dropped stuff all the way home that Bill collected the next morning. Stuff that she had stolen and had in her arms. It had fallen out of her arms all the way home. A trail of dropped stolen stuff she was taking home." When asked by investigators if he knew Ashley's parents, who were his closest neighbors, Smith responded, quote, "I've tried very hard not to. They're nasty people. They have misused and abused too many other people I know for me to have anything to do with them. I limit myself to being polite. I never intentionally talked with them about anything except last year. The spruce trees in the neighborhood have a disease. I went to their door and gave them a Xerox copy of how to identify and how to treat it." Smith explained that he was in his home that day because he was, quote, "uncomfortable with other people's families' holidays, so he preferred to be alone." He described hearing someone turning the doorknob on his door, which stressed him because no one had rang the doorbell first. He then described his emotions as he describes a sequence of events, at first stressed, then concerned, escalating to frightened, afraid, and then terrified. Morrison County Sheriff Michael Wetzel acknowledged that the two young people were at Smith's residence to burglarize it. Nicholas Brady's sister later told reporters that 2 months prior, he had stolen prescription drugs from her home. That case was still under investigation at the time of his death. Smith was interviewed by investigators with the Morris County Sheriff's Office. During this interview, which was also recorded, he described the killing shots he made to both victims because he wanted to, quote, "end their suffering." Smith admitted openly that he shot them on the stairs to wound them. Then when they tumbled down to the basement floor, he delivered the finishing shots to kill them. He admitted this openly. Smith claims to have heard Kifer laugh after she fell down the stairs and said, quote, "If you're shooting somebody and they're laughing at you, you go again." However, the recording didn't pick up any laugh by Kifer, only her scream and her saying, "Oh my God," in a brief scream as she fell down the stairs. It was later theorized that Smith may have misinterpreted a death rattle exhalation as a laugh. In his interview with the police, Smith admitted that he fired, quote, "more shots than I needed to," and that he, quote, "fired good, clean, finishing shots into Kifer's head."
Byron David Smith was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and would stand trial in April of 2014. Much of the debate involved the real-life applications of the Castle Doctrine. While not all states had them, the law in Minnesota at the time did have statutes in place regarding the Castle Doctrine. Castle law designates a person's abode or any legally occupied space, such as a car or garage, as a place in which a person has protections and immunities permitting that person, in certain circumstances, to use force up to and including lethal force to defend oneself against an intruder, free from the legal consequences resulting from the force used. Minnesota's law does also state that a person has a duty to retreat if they can reasonably do so. It does not have a stand-your-ground law, as some states do, but the Castle Doctrine negates the duty to retreat when one is within their home or other legally occupied structure. Simply put, Castle doctrine, also referred to as defense of habitation, is the law that says when individuals are threatened in their own homes, they are within their rights to use lethal force and not face criminal charges for doing so. However, most legal analysts stated that while the initial shots fired by Smith were justified to neutralize the threat, the later finishing shots were not because the threat had essentially been removed by that time. There are also laws concerning justifiable homicide, which is separate and distinct from Castle doctrine. Deadly force may be justifiable under justifiable homicide in cases, quote, where the actor reasonably fears imminent peril of death or serious bodily harm to himself or herself or that of another. The mere occurrence of trespassing and the subject's fear or belief that death or serious bodily injury is imminent is sufficient to invoke the Castle doctrine. The burden of proof is much less for Castle doctrine than it is for justifiable homicide. The prosecutor would claim that Smith deliberately parked his car off his property to try to bait the intruders into entering his home, where he was essentially lying in wait so he could kill them in retribution. After observing Kifer and Brady walking outside his home, peering into windows to see if he was home, Smith went into the basement where the prosecutor said he had set up like a deer stand, with his weapons, water, energy bars, and a novel close at hand. He also claimed that Smith's actions, specifically the kill shot to finish off Haile Kifer, constituted overkill. If Smith had called emergency services after he had incapacitated the two teens, he may have been able to prevent one or both of their deaths. Smith did not call the police when he saw Kifer and Brady on a surveillance system, and instead he decided to lie in wait for the pair to enter the basement for the sole purpose of killing them, the prosecutor claimed. Smith recorded more than 6 hours of audio that day, before, during, and after the shooting. Many who listened to the recordings believed he was preempting what was to come. For example, they point to the fact that Smith was sitting in his basement at the bottom of his stairs with a loaded rifle and handgun nearby. Several hours before the shootings occurred, the recording device in Smith's home also captured him practicing what he would say to his friend and neighbor, who he planned to call for assistance. During the mime phone call, Smith says, quote, "Bill, stop by tomorrow morning. No rush, but as soon as convenient. Can you do that? Yeah, park to the north, 100 feet north, 100 yards north of the corner, and walk in from the west." End quote. Smith then launches into a mock phone call with a fictional law firm, saying, quote, "I realize I don't have an appointment, but I'd like to see one of the lawyers there." End quote. He also mumbled the phrase, quote, "in your left eye," seemingly unconnected to anything else during that period.
The prosecutor would hold this up as an example that Smith knew before the events unfolded that day that he would need legal advice from an attorney, indicating he knew what he did was criminally suspect. Smith's mumbling showed that he was garnering a defense for his actions before they even happened. The prosecutor would rhetorically ask the jury why a person would need to hire an attorney and mount a defense when one believes they are acting within the scope of the law. The prosecutor also pointed out that Smith said, quote, "in your left eye," and Kifer was later shot by Smith in her left eye. Smith's recordings, in addition to what some believe illustrates that he planned the shootings by moving his truck and staying in the basement where he wasn't visible to anyone looking in, along with the excessive number of shots fired, and led to the initial second-degree murder charges being changed to first-degree murder. First-degree murder meant that the prosecution believed not only did Smith premeditate the shooting, but that he also lie in wait. Smith's bail was set at $50,000, which Smith did post, allowing him to remain free until his trial in 2014. Smith's defense relied heavily on the Castle doctrine and the prior burglaries Smith experienced over the preceding months. He claimed at trial that his home had been burglarized at least 6 times, and possibly as much as 12, with the thieves stealing valuables and sentimental items such as memorabilia his father collected as a POW. During their investigation, police would discover evidence of the 2 additional break-ins that Smith was seemingly unaware of. On the recording of his police interview, it was clear when it dawns on Smith that his truck being absent from the driveway may have been the reason the two teens targeted his home that day. Smith said he had to move it because he feared it might be burglarized that day. He can be heard saying, with what sounds like genuine surprise in his voice, quote, "So that's why they targeted my house?" There was also evidence of Kifer and Brady being responsible for two previous break-ins at Smith's residence, and Brady was currently being investigated for numerous prior burglaries, including one committed on the day that they were killed. Evidence collected from the car the victims were driving was linked to a burglary of a retired schoolteacher the night before Kifer and Brady were killed. On April 29, 2014, after just 3 hours of deliberation, Byron David Smith was found guilty by the jury on 2 counts of first-degree murder with premeditation and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was immediately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The jurors said the audio recordings had the biggest influence on their verdict. One juror was quoted as saying, quote, "That was the most damning piece of evidence in my mind." That audio recording of the killings and the recording of Mr. Smith's interview immediately after his arrest pretty much convinced me that we were dealing with a deranged individual. Byron Smith did appeal his convictions, and his appeals were denied, and he remains in prison among great controversy among the strong opinions of supporters and opponents alike.
Smith stressed in his interview with police that the thieves had taken several firearms during previous burglaries, and he feared that they would have them and use them on him when they found him present in his home, so he had to obtain the tactical advantage of acting first to neutralize the threat. One criminal defense attorney, Sean Vincent, said that Smith's behavior seemed to progress from obsession to paranoia to possibly delusional thinking or even derangement. He also stated, quote, "The jury is looking at this case, as in any case where self-defense is claimed, where the bottom line is reasonableness, and they're going to dissect this thing. They're going to consider his history, his favorable history, his training, his background, his history of being victimized to the extent that the judge allows it, in any event. And then they're going to take a look at how he handled it. At what point in time, if any, that he had acted unreasonably during the circumstances. Then his claim of self-defense, no matter how strong it would presumptively be by virtue of him being in his own home, would be nullified. If the jury concludes that his actions were unreasonable and that instead of defending himself he would commit a crime, then there is no self-defense claim whatsoever, and he becomes guilty of the crime he was charged with, which was murder. So what were the critical moments in this case? I would think that the jury would consider whether he had lured them there, and this is the idea of taking the truck and moving it. The jury may cut him some slack. He's presumed to be innocent as to each and every fact related to the case. So the jury might conclude that's a possible explanation. He wasn't moving the truck to lure them. That was just a consequence of a separate, innocent reason for moving the truck. And then they take a look at what he did and didn't do. Did he call the police at any point in time when he had the opportunity? Where did he position himself within the house? What did he do, if anything, to avoid direct confrontation? And when they, the intruders, confronted him, what was his behavior and was it reasonable? Did he have an opportunity to stop the violence, or did it go too far? I think what grabbed everyone's attention are those things that set it up to make it look like he was planning to kill whoever came in the house. And then, of course, that eerie recording and his statements to the police. And the forensic findings that corroborate that indeed, not only did he shoot them, but he shot them multiple times. And he continued to shoot them after they had been incapacitated for his stated and apparent sole purpose of killing them. At each moment in this sequence, the jury evaluates the reasonableness of Mr. Smith's actions. And notwithstanding the incredible protections that the Castle Doctrine and most state laws provide a homeowner in defending their property against intruders, it's clear there are lines, and this was a case about those limits, and whether those lines and limits were exceeded." End quote. And I just said a lot there, so I wanted to remind everyone listening that was a quote by defense attorney Sean Vincent.
Attorney Don West said of the Smith case, quote, "There is something, call it moral justice. There's right and wrong. There's legal and illegal, and they're not the same. Maybe straightening up this misinterpretation that if someone breaks into your home, you can do anything you want to them, up to and including killing them, simply by virtue of the fact they've entered without your permission. I think Smith believed that his rational mind wasn't in control anymore. But as they came down the stairs, I think he had already concluded that not only would they be dead, but he had the absolute rights to do it. The castle doctrine negates the legal obligation to retreat. In states where you have a duty to retreat, if you can do so safely, the castle doctrine affords a person the right to stay within their home or vehicle or place where one's legally allowed to be and protect the home against intruders and those who have entered unlawfully. Most states enhance the castle doctrine with some presumptions, such as if someone enters your home through breaking and entering, your fear at sustaining death or great bodily harm is reasonable, and so the use of deadly force is therefore justified. Given that, had Smith not fired several, quote, good, clean finishing shots, and he had called law enforcement at the time, or soon after the events occurred, he likely wouldn't have faced any charges at all. The enhancements of castle doctrine would have covered his actions. While this might seem nitpicky, it's important to make the distinction between burglary and robbery. Robbery is the crime of stealing from a person directly, such as carjacking. Burglary is stealing from a home, dwelling, or business. So while someone may say, "My house has been robbed," that's actually an inaccurate description, as only people can be robbed. Homes are burgled. Another relevant linguistic distinction occurs within the castle doctrine laws themselves. While there are federal laws that apply to all states and territories, each state is responsible for crafting its own criminal code of laws, and it's the individual's responsibility to make themselves aware of them. Ignorance of the law is not a valid excuse, not for following them.
In Minnesota, where Little Falls is located, their statute uses the word fear, not belief. Even so, it's likely that Smith meant the literal definition by virtue of his audio recordings bearing witness to the moment. On them, you can clearly hear Smith gasp out loud when he hears the window glass breaking. It sounds like a sudden intake of breath and is forceful enough to be picked up by the recording device. From that point forward, Smith's rapid and shaky breath can also be heard. It sounds like he is breathing through his mouth to increase the oxygen required by a dump of adrenaline to his system. As the first footsteps of Nick Brady are heard descending the stairs, his quick breathing becomes even faster and takes on a ragged, shaky quality. It continues throughout his encounter with Brady. As Smith reloads his weapon, he can be heard consciously trying to slow his breathing by taking longer inhalations and holding them before exhaling. It appears somewhat successful, as in the 10 minutes he waits until Haile Kifer begins calling out for Nick upstairs, Smith's breathing calmed a bit. But when he hears Kifer call out and she begins to walk down the stairs, Smith's breathing once again becomes rapid, a probable indication of fear. When he says Kifer, "you die," when he shoots her, his voice has an uncontrolled and excited quality that could also be an indication of fear. And while Smith's detractors might say that his tone was evidence of the glee he felt in killing the two teens who he believed had been tormenting him, the U.S. justice system requires that a jury, when faced with two equally plausible interpretations, go with the one most favorable to the defendant, given the inherent presumption of innocence. The town of Little Falls, Minnesota was greatly divided over the Smith case. People's opinions on the actions of Smith tend to fall into one of three camps: those who believe he acted in justifiable self-defense, those who believe he committed premeditated murder, and those who feel some mixture of the two opinions. Those who believe Smith was acting in justifiable self-defense believe that he was within his rights to shoot the intruders who had forced their way into his home with the intent of robbing him. They believe that Smith was acting to protect himself and his property, and they view his actions as heroic. Those in this camp thought that the two teens had it coming and that they got what they deserved. They point out that Smith hanging out in his basement was interpreted as evidence of Smith trying to lure the intruders to break in, but for all we know, he may have gone about armed and ready every day after experiencing that many burglaries. How do we know he only did it on this day? On the opposite side of this opinion, there are those who believe Smith's actions constituted premeditated murder. They claim that Smith acted with malice and actively enticed the teens to come into his home for the sole purpose of killing them. They add that Smith should have called for police as soon as he heard breaking glass, or even called out a warning to the pair like, quote, "Hey, I'm here and I'm armed, and if you proceed to enter, I will shoot. The police have been called and are on their way."
There are few cases as divisive as the killings committed by Byron David Smith on November 22nd of 2012. The castle doctrine has limits, and Smith was found to have crossed the line beyond a reasonable doubt in court of law. Yet we all know that the courts are a product of humans, and humans are not infallible. What makes this case so divisive? Is it the age of the victims? The age of the defendant? Do people have a right to feel safe in their own homes? Does law enforcement bear any responsibility in this case? If they had done more, been more proactive, would Smith have felt safer and not felt compelled to use deadly force? Was the prosecutor justified in bringing murder charges against Smith? Was the shooting a first degree, second degree, or manslaughter, or none of the above? At times, Smith is heard making bizarre, even delusional comments on the recordings. Was this an indication of mental illness? Something that should have been considered at his trial? Were his symptoms of PTSD more severe than anyone realized? Byron David Smith is 72 today and remains incarcerated in Oak Park Heights Correctional Facility in Minnesota. All of his possible legal appeals have been exhausted and denied. Given his age and the length of his sentence, he will likely die in prison.
Thanks for listening. I'm very interested to see the comment section of this video. And we tried to be as unbiased in this case as possible. So hopefully no one thinks that we're on either side. I don't know. But I think it's a hard thing to...
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that juror. Like, if you just hear about this case, you're like, okay, this guy was kind of, I guess, within his rights to defend his home. But I don't know if, at the time we're recording this, I don't know if we're going to actually play the recording or not. But if you hear the actual recording, it is... I don't even know the word to describe it. It's haunting. It's pretty creepy.
Yeah, it's nuts. And, you know, how I feel about it is basically, you know, I think he was armed. He was in his basement. I think the best thing he could have done is called the police right away, right when he knew they were breaking in, call the police, call out loud, and let them know that he is armed and that he has called the police. And that's just my opinion. Again, trying to stay unbiased about it, but that is my opinion, I think.
Canceled.
Yeah, I think he could have done that, but he didn't. But let us know what you think, because like Stefan said, it is very divisive.
Very. Bye, guys. We love you. Bye.
Stepmom.
Stepmoms. 50K.